Studio. Are you thinking or planning for retirement? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees. Well, we've got with us Professor Christopher Green, law professor at the University of Mississippi. I know you've got a much better title than that. You're the, what are you, the Witten Chair? Is that right?
One of the Witten chairs. So
okay.
They anytime you give money to have a chair, you initially give it to just one guy, and then especially when they retire, they give it to the younger folks. They sometimes have more than one. But
okay,
yeah, Dean Davis has a little a plaque on his door saying he's the Witten chair. But I think that was a special thing for just him. So I'm one of the Witten chairs and one of the many Witten things all over the state.
I'm sure. So talk to us a little bit about what's going on right now in the Supreme Court, at least I know there's a lot going on, but can you sort of explain where this immunity case, like what's going on with the arguments that we heard yesterday?
Yeah, so it's so actually right now, so Friday, the Friday after argument in argument weeks, that's when they finally get together and say what they're doing. So this is so we got a whole bunch of prosecutions, 4 big ones, 2 of them in state court, which in general I think have been a lot less professionally handled by the prosecutors, and 2 of them in federal court under this fellow Jack Smith, who's appointed as a special counsel, not an independent counsel. For back in the day, they had this whole special independent counsel law that got upheld in the Morrison v. Olson case. Justice Kavanaugh actually yesterday, he said, well, Morrison Olson was one of the worst opinions we had, approving this mechanism. But so you got 2 cases, 2 federal prosecutions. One of them in Florida has to do with all the documents that kept at Mar-a-Lago, didn't return. And then this one, so this is in Washington, D.C., if it ever goes to trial, which I think it may or may not go to trial, but if it goes to trial, it would be in a Washington, D.C. jury. And this is just about the January 6th stuff. So we have a trial, and the trials in state court are more complicated and kind of wacky. The New York one that's going on right now is about covering up hush payments as a campaign donation that was improperly or failed to be reported. So the New York one is a real triple bank shot. But the case they're talking about yesterday, Supreme Court, is just the straight up, hey, he was doing illegal things, trying to subvert the results of the election on January 6th, 2021, and in the weeks before that. So it's this major unresolved question it's always been unresolved about whether you can have criminal prosecutions of a former president for stuff that he did as president or while president. So that distinction between things he did while president and things he did qua president, so in his official role as president, that distinction is really important. So Trump himself, his lawyers say, we concede we can be that Trump can be prosecuted for personal actions. So
right. When
he tweets out, come to D.C. on January 6th, it'll be wild. There were several.
Did they concede that would be a personal action?
Yeah, so that would be a personal action. But then there's some questions. So under one of the formulations of the immunity rules that could be adopted, he would only have immunity for official actions. So then they asked him, well, is calling up Georgia people saying, hey, we'd really like you to find 12,000 votes or something like that, or calling up legislatures saying, hey, we'd like you to indicate uncertainty in the results of your election. Is that somehow official? So the president's lawyers were saying, Trump's lawyers were saying, as president, I have this official role in recommending legislation to the states and to Congress. And Article 2 actually mentions the president suggesting things to Congress. Doesn't say anything about the state. And really, there's no role for the president as such in the certification of electoral votes for the presidential election. So just his answer, the way that he was trying to pitch that as somehow officially presidential stuff was, I think everybody recognized that was a bit of a stretch. But then there's stuff, on January 6th, failing to call out the authorities to deal with the violence. So, well, yeah, that's clearly a presidential action. So then there's, anyway, a bunch of questions about, just exactly what the distinction is between personal and official, and just whether we have going to have an official immunity doctrine at all. We're up for bids yesterday.
And they, just to confirm, I mean, because I think if you look at some of the liberal coverage of it, you could walk away, at least if you didn't dive deep into it, with the view that what the president's lawyers were asserting was that he has some sort of blanket immunity for anything that happens while he's president. Like he could come break into your house and take your TV, but you couldn't prosecute him because he was he was president at the time. That's not really the argument, right? They conceded that you can get him on personal stuff, and given that concession, I mean, one way they could try to resolve it would be to say, look, because especially given some of the stipulations, so given the mutual stipulations of the president and Jack Smith has said, yeah, I can go prosecute this, so that the criminal liability would be just based on the personal stuff, and I can talk about the official stuff, but only as evidence of the state of mind. So they might kind of stitch together a compromise. It didn't sound. There are a lot of things going on. It didn't sound like they had a cooked together compromise ready to go, certainly. But sometimes they like to have the oral argument first, and then the compromise will come together later. But but Trump was not saying he can commit crimes and just to be completely immune from any criminal prosecution. And of course, the impeachment clause says punishment in cases of impeachment doesn't extend further than removal from office and disqualification, but the party convicted shall be liable to the ordinary criminal processes. Essentially, so it's very, very clear just from the text of the Constitution, you can be prosecuted if you're convicted. The question is, if you're not convicted, so the president is saying if you can get a third of the Senate plus one, that gives you an immunity from future prosecution, which seems, and they want that only to apply to the president, even though the clause talks about anybody who's impeached. So I think they were pretty skeptical of that particular argument. Based on the text of the impeachment clause, but whether there's some sort of background principle, there's more interest in that. Because if I remember correctly, it was Justice Coney Barrett who pushed back hard on this idea that, or at least seemed to ask questions that were skeptical of the notion that the president might have one standard of immunity under the impeachment clause, but the other officers subject to impeachment would have a different one. If I understood her questions correctly.
Yeah. No, she was so. If you're kind of thinking, kind of ranking, which of them are the most friendly to Trump's claims to the least friendly, definitely the three liberals. They all made very, very clear that
as you'd expect,
are pretty uninterested in this. Although Justice Jackson had some questions that suggested, of the three, like she might. I don't think. It's not clear from that any of the three are going to say there's no immunity at all ever. But Justice Barrett of the other six was clearly thinking like, man, these arguments are really, and she asked a lot of very pointed, pretty logical, just how does this work fit together logically? Some questions that were very, I thought, extremely insightful, and thinking like, yeah, it doesn't really make sense. Especially talking about some of the constitutional doubt arguments. So these arguments, unless the statute specifically names the president, he's not going to be prosecuted. She pointed out, like, well, why would you have a pardon if it doesn't even apply to him? And why would you have to have an immunity argument if it doesn't apply to him? Why, there's a whole like if somebody shows up and says, "Oh, I was completely justified in shooting the person. I wasn't even there that day." Those two defenses contradict each other. There were a number of the arguments that Trump's counsel was making that really didn't fit together. I think Barrett was noticing that and pointing that out, and clearly is behind the scenes, kind of skeptical of a lot of that.
Can you? We're coming up on a break, Professor. Can you stick with us for another segment?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Well, y'all, this is Lucian Smith in for Gerard Gibbert here on Middays on SuperTalk Mississippi, coming to you live from the Element Wealth Studios. Stick with us for more with Professor Chris for Gerard Gibbert here on Middays on SuperTalk Mississippi. We are coming to you from the Element Wealth Studio. Are you thinking about or planning for retirement? Do you have a plan? Go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees. We've got Professor Chris Green from the University of Mississippi School of Law on with us. If you've got questions for the professor, hit us up at the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. I'll remind you that's the C Spire text line, so hit us up with a text. Professor, we were talking a little bit about the immunity case that the Supreme Court argued yesterday. It's interesting, and your comments make this point, but I think the people who aren't lawyers or who don't closely watch the judicial process, there's this tendency to think of judges as sort of having an R or a D by their name and being essentially political actors, which just isn't true. I mean, we were told that, if Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett got on there, they would just be these shills for Trump who were just going to do whatever Trump's people told them they were supposed to do. And then by the same token, there's this assumption that the people who were appointed by Democratic presidents were somehow just shills for the Democratic Party who were going to be pure political actors. And so I think folks who think that way struggle a little bit to intellectualize some of these decisions, like the decision for not allowing Colorado to take Trump's name off the ballot, if I remember, was a unanimous decision. Presumably a bunch of Democratic shills wouldn't vote, would love to have him off there, but they follow their obedience is to their conception of the law, hopefully.
Oh, yeah. And one thing about what they're definitely fussing over, I think the immunity, the pragmatics of it really boils down to two different questions about your trust of the president. One is, if you give him, give a presidential immunity doctrine, have a doctrine of presidential immunity, you have to trust the president to do the right thing. Well, he's elected to do the right thing and not to commit crimes. But then there's also this question that the president is the one in charge of this prosecution function. Are you going to trust the president not to prosecute his predecessor? So I think it seemed pretty clear. There were several times when they would propose a standard. One of the justices would say something about a standard, and the litigants would say, well, let me just talk about the ways in which Trump is different or something. And they say, well, no, I'm trying to come up with a general standard. I think one of the things they're legitimately worried about is if Trump wins the election, is he going to indict Biden? Because you can come up with grounds, given the breadth of the criminal law, given the amount of prosecutorial discretion we have, you can find crimes for lots of different things. So, it could be something with Hunter, it could be something with immigration. They've impeached Mayorkas on impeachment on immigration grounds, and they're setting up a rule. They're articulating a rule that's supposed to apply to everybody. And it was very clear from, just some of the questions on the folks on the left, and definitely some of the ones on the right, that, they want to, whatever hurdles they set up for prosecuting a president, they want to set up hurdles, whatever hurdles they're going to be for this year, but also for next year, because turnabout is going to happen at some point. Maybe Trump might not win the election, but you want to have a system that's going to have something like the rule of law instead of just the rule of individual people doing what the mob wants or what's popular, what the polls say, that kind of thing. We have laws and we have rules that get followed. That's the hope. When society breaks down, it's not law might not help, but I think they really are all nine of them. I think doing good faith effort to find out what the law is.
There's embedded in there was a lot of great stuff, but one thing that jumped out to me, one of the really good points, is just how the real problem of over criminalization at least at the federal level in America, such that a clever prosecutor who's motivated by whatever happens to motivate him or her can probably find a crime that virtually anybody has committed. I mean, we're so far beyond the 7 felonies from 20 years ago, 22 centuries ago, that there's so much at the federal level that it would be easy for a politically motivated prosecutor to say, well, here's where we're going to be able to prosecute a political enemy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many they were talking like, hey, they're saying we just had an argument yesterday about doing something. There's so many crimes that basically criminalize like dishonesty anywhere near like the mail or anywhere near a proceeding. And right. The need for better standards. I think they're in a lot of areas. I think the justices are really realizing that the lack of any standards of when you bring prosecutions is causing a lot of trouble. So they ask a lot of questions about when exactly do you bring these kinds of charges. And I think the intellectual momentum for some kind of reining in of prosecutors just never having to say they're sorry, never having to explain themselves to anyone. I think there's a lot of intellectual momentum against it, and I think we'd probably need some legislation to do it. But kind of the good government, reining in prosecutors run amok idea is, I think it's increasing. It got increasing momentum.
You do get the sense, or at least I get the sense. I'm not going to bind you to this view, but that every ambitious Democratic prosecutor in the country has been trying to figure out what is a theory under which I could indict Donald Trump, because being the guy who gets him is obviously going to be massive for their political future. I think New York's probably the best example because the theory of prosecution there, I think even a lot of Democrats seem to think is a real stretch.
Oh yeah, both the civil liability for supposedly misrepresenting his assets, that, the banks still make the loans anyway, and they're, the most sophisticated lenders in the world. So that one was like, wow.
And they didn't take a loss, right?
Yeah. It just, that was wacky in a number of respects. And really, the Stormy Daniels thing with, all of this supposedly being a campaign financed. It's so weird. Just the level of the level of professionalism from the Jack Smith prosecutions in the federal courts is, just so much better. And then the circus in Georgia that they've had is there's a reason why they are doing it, but I think the difference is pretty palpable. But even the federal prosecution. A lot of people saying, "Oh, the Supreme Court's trying to delay this." This could have been pushed forward in early 2021. All this January 6th stuff, some of the document stuff may have taken a little longer to develop. But if the Biden administration really wanted to deal with the January 6th stuff with respect to Trump himself, it's about tweets that are really, really bad, I think. But, everybody knew what the score was, even like in January when he was impeached. You could just take that, use it as a template for an indictment, and we could have had this over with a long time ago, I think. But the schedule is pretty tight now. It's highly unlikely to get anything like a trial in the federal cases before the election. And then, Trump can countermand the appointment of Smith. Could even try to self-pardon if he's worried about like even 4 years past that. The federal prosecutions, as professional as they've been, could be even better, I think.
That's an interesting question. I would assume a self-pardon would generate a fair amount of litigation. That's
yeah. Well, so one of my fellow I knew in law school, Brian Kalt, he wrote his student note about whether you can pardon yourself. So he's kind of an interesting guy. He's the world expert on self-pardons, on the 25th Amendment, and on late impeachment. So he'd written about these things long before Trump was on the scene. And so if his name is in the news, he's sometimes in the news because he came up with a theory about how you can't have a proper jury if you commit a crime in the Idaho part of Yellowstone.
I remember reading about
self-pardons. Yeah. So, but Brian says, if I'm in the news because of the Idaho thing, life is going better in our republic. But when we're seriously talking about self-pardons or late impeachments or the 25th Amendment, it's things are dire.
Well, if we've got about 30 seconds left, Professor, what should, in terms of what's still on the Supreme Court docket, either with regards to Trump or otherwise, what ought people be paying attention to for the rest of this term?
Oh, wow. I mean, so one biggie is the administrative law case. Chevron deference may be disappearing. I'm excited about that because I'm hoping one of my students is going to get cited. But they have a lot. I mean, they have fewer cases, but the cases they have are a lot bigger. So and this last immunity one is probably the biggest of all. So they've got a lot of blockbusters coming.
Well, that's late June, I assume, is when we should expect to see that.
That's right. Yeah, late June, early July. If it gets into July, they're burning the midnight oil.
Well, Professor, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Great to talk to you.
Y'all, this has been Lucian Smith in for Gerard Gibbert here on Middays on SuperTalk Mississippi, here with Professor Christopher Green of the University of Mississippi Law School in the Element Wealth Studios. Stick with us for more after this break.